Hello and welcome to this Worldographer 101 video. I was asked to do a new one. It's been a while since I've done a video on the basics of Worldographer, and was asked to try to do one and kind of try to keep it simple, but as the programmer, that's going to be a little hard for me. To me, it's all, I've been kind of working with it for far too long, and well, anyway, I'll try to make it as simple as I can. What you see is a Worldographer after it's been started up, and we just generated a sample couple of maps so that we'd have something interesting in the background for the beginning of the video. If we go over here to the File menu, this is where you're going to want to go to create a new map. And so I would do New World Kingdom Map. If Worldographer also has functionality built in for city-town maps, or also settlements is what we call them, or battle map dungeon maps. So you would go to these other options for those. Also on the File menu, you're going to find your Open options, Open Recent, and a couple of other options that get a little more detailed. We've got Save and Save As, and then since Worldographer is actually Hexographer 2, if you were working with the older program and want to import that map into Worldographer, you would use this option here, or another option if you wanted to add it to an existing map for some reason. And then if you were working with the sister programs, the prior sister programs, Dungeonographer or Cityographer, those are there as well. If you want to export the map, we've got a couple of options here. Export image or export selected area as an image. It's important to know that these are based on the size of your current hexes in your current view, which is controlled over here with tile width and tile height. You're going to want to change these if you want to have more resolution, better images. My understanding is that the human eye only sees about 150 dpi. The 300 dpi that's kind of standard is kind of a carryover from a printing method years ago. But anyway, if you want 150 or 300 dpi, then you would set that number in here for tile width or the height. It's probably not going to matter too much if you do one or the other. It's only a 10% difference or whatever. But anyway, you can make those changes over there and then export it at the other size. And we export as an image, like I said, and then it's up to your print program to print it out at the size that you want. That just, we just give you as much resolution as you request. Then it's up to the print program to print it at whatever size it is that you want. However, well, actually, let me get into the selected area too. And then if you wanted to select an area, you can come up here to Edit, Select. Then you can click and drag and make an area, declare an area of the map that you want to print. And then whatever you, when you choose this export selected area as image, that's the section that would be printed out, or rather exported. If you're doing if you do want to get something that spells out exactly how large your hexes will be, if you want 1-inch hexes or 1/4-inch hexes or whatever, you can go to Export to PDF, and that brings up a dialog like this, and then it will create PDF pages based on the size, the paper size that you choose, and sets that up based on what you've chosen. And likewise, you can do the same thing with a selected area. Export notes and information. Every time that we generate a new map in Worldographer, it's creating a bunch of information about that map, nations, cultures, religions, languages, and it's pretty cool, and we'll show that a little bit. You can ignore it. It's fully editable as well if you want to start from scratch and rewrite it, or if you want to take what the stubs that are generated and expand it. Great. And then finally down here you've got the a way to check and update your licenses. Worldographer has a free version that has a large amount of functionality built in, and then if you want to use some power user functionality though, then we've got these we have 3 different licenses depending on what portion of the functionality you want to use, and excuse me, and this is where you would go to enter those. And finally, we have an exit option there. So let's go back up to getting you started with a new map, and we'll dive into these options here. This is what that dialog looks like. It's actually probably important for me to toggle over to the other map to show what a few of these things are, particularly map orientation, map projection, and terrain icons. So this map here has our classic terrain icons. These are very reminiscent of the RPG icons in the late 70s, early 80s in particular. But I love them, and lots of people like to use them regardless of what year you're in. This is also the columns lineup orientation, where you can see all the columns stack up nicely. And it's also an example of a flat map projection, which is pretty much self-explanatory. However, if I toggle over to this other map here, now we've got, this is everything opposite. So we've got our other icon set. This is our isometric style set of icons, and this is sort of reminiscent of the Civilization computer game. That's what we were kind of going for, but it's probably a little bit more detailed than that. It is also showing our projection. This is our icosahedral projection. So you've got, kind of think of it as a D20 that's kind of been unrolled, and you've got 20 triangular sections, 5 across the top, 5 across the bottom, and 10 in the middle that are all joined up, so it looks like a trapezoid. And then the third thing to show you here is that this is with our rows lineup orientation, where they're going straight across. But because the isometric style icons are meant to look a little squished, these are also a little squished. That's the look that we were going for when we designed them. And we give you a little bit of suggestions on this dialogue, which we'll get back to here. So yeah, I can set whether I want the columns to line up or the rows to line up. I can set a flat projection or an icosahedral projection. If I toggle that, it's going to ask me, what's the triangle side size? That's how many hexes are along each edge of the triangle of this particular, of the projection. So if you want a larger map, make that a larger value. We're going to do a flat map, so I'm going to undo that. How large do you want your map to be? How many hexes high and wide? And on our website, on worldographer.com, there is a page that goes into the details of how to size it. If you want an Earth-sized world, take the circumference of the world, basically, and divide it up by however many hexes or however many miles or kilometers per hex that you want to have on that world level. And we have some suggestions on that too that allow you to kind of drill down to get to, say, a 6-mile hex or a 5-mile hex. You can kind of do some math to figure out, oh, well, okay, let me do 120 or whatever miles per hex at the world level, and then that would require me to do this many hexes wide and this many hexes high. So we have that on a post on our website. That you can look over. You can set if you don't want to start from the top down. I generally do, because I'll generate the world and I'll kind of tweak that a little bit, especially the starting area where the players might be, and then I'll drill down and tweak that section more and more. And if I need to come back up, I'll go back up to the top and flesh out or change up another section as needed. But I tend to like to work world down. I know some people like to just focus on that one starting area, and that's fine. That's great. You can do that. You can start out with the kingdom level, for example, and drill. There is a 4th level that was added more recently, which is a province level that we'll probably be adding to that drop-down list. But that's kind of if you wanted to have a 1-mile hex. Actually, no. There's a reason why we can't do that. Add that to the initial list. That generates the tiles as you're moving the map around. And it's doing that based on what's on the kingdom level. So the kingdom level is the lowest that you can start with. But that's perfect for a map that's, say 5 miles per hex or 6 miles per hex or 8 or whatever your preference is. But as long as you're not doing 1 mile per hex, kingdom level is a good thing to do. Here's that information down here for how to size your hexes, depending on if they're oriented columns line up or rows line up, or how the map projection is. Then over here on the other side, let me do this bottom one real quick. So here's our terrain icons. Do you want the classic style, or do you want the isometric style, like what's displayed here currently? Now I'm going to dive into this. I'm going to do a map that is all one terrain, because we kind of have a cool feature that I like to show off, and that gets overlooked. I hit generate map, And let me just pan to the middle here a little bit and then zoom out. So I'm just dragging that this around. Initially there's no green window there, but as soon as I click on it, it appears. And then I can just use my scroll wheel to kind of pan out here, or zoom out rather. And I've got the whole map in front of me. I have the terrain drawer open here. Usually you'll just see it starts out like this. Terrain is really what Hexographer, Worldographer is all about. Terrain and features, I would say. To a lesser degree, your shapes. And of course, you're going to have labels on your map. But really, it all starts with terrain. And we've got a filter here where if I only want to see one type, like I'm actually going to start putting down some water. So I want just the water tiles. I'm going to do just the basic ocean here. And what I do is I click across and I'm just dragging in where on the map would I like to see oceans. And I'm going to make the whole edges of the map ocean. And this is slowed down because of the recording software that we're using. Normally you'd see that this would be making a pretty nice line. And I'm going to add in some ocean cutting across in a couple of different ways. So that I've got that. And then once I've got my oceans, now let me delete this filter. And so we can also filter by type of icon. So if I want to see all the classics, they're here. Or if I want to see all the isometrics, they're here. Since we're making a classic map, we'll go with this. And now I can go and I can put in, hey, okay, I want to have, a large forest area over there. Maybe I want to have some dense forest in the middle of that a little bit. Maybe I want to have some jungle here real close to the equator. Gonna throw in some desert area, maybe on the other side of that continent. We'll put in some of that kind of desert. Maybe that's too much of that kind, so maybe I'll just throw in this here like this. Put in some sandy desert around it. Just whatever you like. This is I kind of feel like Bob Ross in a way here. Just happy accidents. Just see what comes to mind. Just play around with things. Here's some hills. And scroll down a little bit further so I get down to my mountains here. I've got a mountain icon here that I like to use. Those are kind of the most common icons that I use will be mountains, hills, forests, and definitely just this plain farmland area where I can say I want that and say I want that all around there. And I've got that. And then on the other side, I'm just going to try to be quick, try to wrap this up. But again, this to me, like I said, I might be kind of a bit of a strange person, but I kind of enjoy this. Not just kind of, I really enjoy this. This is kind of the fun part of world building. It's kind of like painting. So I can put that in. Let me put in another hill chain here. We'll throw in some hills down there. We'll throw in the mountains now in between. Put in a line of mountains there. Maybe we've got a little bit of mountain there. Let's go back to the hills though, so that I've got some of these around those mountains. And so what we're getting to, what we're building up to, is this program is going to do kind of a nearest neighbor fill for us. And that's kind of, that's pretty cool. And so now I've got some other hills. And the more terrain that I drop in here, the more interesting it's going to be in a way. I mean, I'm sure it would get to a point where that would be, overload, but I think that it can be quite interesting and fun to see a bunch of this and how it works out. So I think I've got enough. As I said, this is going to do a nearest neighbor fill, so you kind of want to just have a feel for where everything is. And then I go up here to our tools, and I run Terrain Wizard. And that's what this is called, Terrain Wizard. So I click that, and boom, I've got my continents done here, and then I could tweak it from there. Now again, I was trying to be really quick, so I would probably actually beforehand, I'd probably be tweaking more of the terrain around. Also, this is doing a little bit of randomness. You can see that it dropped in some other icons randomly here in this jungle area. We have a couple of heavy jungles and likewise forest, heavy forest. And that's controlled by, on the options here, we've got add randomness to terrain fills / children. So that's what it does. It finds a couple of different terrain types that it's been programmed to say, hey, hey, if it's forest, then there could be some heavy forest there too, and some forested hills, and so change it up a little bit for some variety. All right, back to our generator, our new map screen here. So I can also, though, generate the terrain instead of doing all one terrain, and you can pick any terrain in the system that way. But I can go to generate terrain. I can then I could say that I want to adjust a region. So if I'm just doing a small section of a world, I might want to spell out, um, you know, and these are all percentages. I might want to spell out how much of the different terrain types there are. We are locked into, I think, 10 or 11 different terrain types that are built in to this. You're not going to be able to do more, but you can change up which ones are there. So if you wanted to change your deciduous forest to an evergreen forest or something like that, you can do that. And this is just saying what terrain is going to be next to it. So if a particular, at first it puts down some blotches of terrain based on the overall popularity of the different terrain types here. And then once it does those initial blotches, then it will just look and say, okay, hey, this one was, flat farmland here, and next to it, hey, there's an 11% chance of grassland or a 30% chance of the next one being flat farmland, and so on. And then the last column here is the amount of water, ocean in this case. Whatever your last category is, that's just summing up, and doing the difference. So this row otherwise added up to 65%, so this last column is 35%. I should point out that I'm doing version 1.42 here, because this functionality here, being able to save these settings and reload them later, is new as of about 1.40 or so. So you're going to want to get that update if this is important to you, especially if you've spent a lot of time tweaking all these settings and then you want to come back to the screen, come back to it later, and load them in, you can. Or, if you want to create a full world, and this is what I typically like to do, is I like to just say, hey, let me create a full world, and here's how much land I want there to be, and of that land, how mountainous should it be, how much vegetation should there be, and so forth. And as I said before, we've got a number of nations that will get generated in some data for you, so we'll show that off in a little bit as well. But you can change that number there. So let's hit generate map, and so now we've generated this map based on all those settings, and I got a nice map. Occasionally you'll get something where you'll have some terrain off on the side, on the edge, and if you want to get rid of that, there's two ways to do that. If you're using the Pro version, you can come up to the Tools menu. You can do expand, shrink, and here you can say, okay, I'm going to drop for, say if there's extra ocean on one side, like there isn't a lot of extra ocean over here. So actually we could do this. Even though we don't have too much land, we'll do this just so that our land masses are a little bit more centered. And so I can put 4 over on this side, and that will keep the same overall number of hexes, but it will shift everything over for us a little bit. Although we're going to have to fill in that extra water, but we can do that. Yeah, the algorithm, though, I should point out, so occasionally, it tries to avoid putting land masses on the edges. However, because you can set any amount of land, if it fails, if it runs into problems after doing 2 or 3 maps, maybe 5, maybe as many as 5, then it says, oh, maybe you've got a high setting, or maybe the luck of the gods are just not with you. And we'll create that map with extra on the side. So if you don't have the Pro version and you can't do something like this, and you want to keep that map, well, you'd have to actually restart and do a new map. So if you've got the Pro version, though, you can go ahead and expand and shrink the number of tiles. So we hit OK. That gives us that new row over there. Now what I can do, I've already selected water, ocean here. And over here on this terrain drawer, I can do a paint bucket. So that's just going to fill in all that. And then up here, now I should point out that this mini map up here only updates every minute or so. So that's why you're seeing it being a black area on the side over here. So I can also, though, say I want icy. and turn off paint bucket. And then I can just do these polar areas here. Or if I wanted to do a little bit more terrain at one time, I can do that. Hit this. This is a, what's the option called? Wide terrain placement. So this does 3 across, just to show you what that looks like. There you go. If I clicked one spot, it does, a cluster of terrain icons, or terrain hexes. And I can do undo. I can do a Control Z to undo that. That's also up here on the edit menu, the cut, copy, paste. Undo, redo, delete. Undo, redo is important there. That's probably the most important thing there of that list. I will note that if a particular control has focus, like if I have a focus in this particular text box, that might intercept the undo, or there's also some number spinners like these will intercept that undo. And so if you don't have undo working, that might be the reason. It might be the focus. And the thing to do is to just click elsewhere on the program, one of these empty areas, and then you should be able to undo properly. All right, so let's get into the rest of the terrain drawer. We already talked about the filter. Talked about this filter as well. I've shown you selecting terrain and placing terrain. I showed you the paint bucket. So the next thing to do is come over here to select. So I can select a particular hex. I can say, hey, this volcano, what's that about? And it's selected. You don't see it. There's a very, very narrow yellow line around it. You're not going to see it at this resolution. But that updated these values on the side, what the elevation is, and how plentiful are resources there. And I can click another one. I can go to these mountains over here, and you're going to see it shift a little bit. I can see it shift a little bit, and it changes a little bit based on each area. And these are just percentages. It's just how plentiful are those resources. You can change those up for that particular selected thing. You can also check this box, and then the next terrain that you put down until you uncheck it or change these values around are going to have the settings that are there as you place terrain. Make coastline is kind of cool, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit for this. So I hit make coastline. I can click any of these tiles, water tiles, and it's going to add a little bit of coastline to it. And it's basing that off of what color is the adjacent terrain. And then it attempts to, for the most part, it attempts to try to make these match up the adjacent one. Occasionally you get a little spur that's sticking out. I already showed you icy, GM only. So if I click GM only and I put select back on, I can select, let's select the volcano again. And I can say GM only. And now it disappears. And that's a way for me to, as GM, to kind of hide a section of the map. We also have a fog of war drawer further down. Let me just show you briefly what that is. So we got the fog of war thing here. We'll get into more detail on that. If I want to see those GM only things, I go down to the bottom here and I check that box for GM only, and it's back on. So yeah, in that way I can have a player's version of the map, and I can have a GM version of the map. That's what that's all about. Override the background color. So if I, this is another way, in this case it was set to white before, but if I wanted to have, for some reason, a different color there, maybe that particular mountain is magical and I want to give it a really neon magenta color. You can do that. So that pretty much covers all that. Configure, this will get into the details. We're not going to go into this, but this is a way for me to, I can select what type of icons I'm trying to edit, continue, and then it pulls that all up and I can edit the sizes or what icons are displayed or so forth. So that's what that's about, but that would be not a 101 video. Moving on, if I go down to features, like I said, terrain and features are the two main aspects of Worldographer that you want to be thinking about. So here I've got a number of features, and I can filter these by type and filter them by particular things. So for example, if I want city, this is 3 types of cities that are built in that are classic in style. I can click this one, and I just plop it on the map where I want it to go. So if I want it to be here on this coast here, there we go. It's there. And, you know, if I wanted some ruined cities, that there was something else nearby, hey, here's off in the desert, something happened there, something went wrong, some magical experiment went awry, turn that city into a desert. There we go. We've got a configuration option for that too, where it will pull up all the features of a particular type, just like what we saw from the terrain. But again, that's a video. That's for another video. I can select though, and then I highlight that, and then any changes that I make here will apply to that selected item, not the next one that I place. We'll get to those in a moment. When you pull up notes of selected, because Worldographer is generating a bunch of information about many of these more common features, more common points of interest. So here's a city, you know, how affluent is it, and why was it founded, and so on and so forth. And these are all randomly generated. So like this one here, well, that founding reason, suburb of a nearby city, that might be very true, that this was the suburb of this ruined city that was over here. So a lot of times you might think of it and you might look at it at first and you're like, oh, well, that doesn't fit. But then you give it a second glance and you're like, oh, yeah, you know, I can make that work. Or if you don't like what it's generated, then you can regenerate all those details and it will do that for you and give you different new reasons and new attractions that are in the city and so forth. And if you kind of like it, but it doesn't quite work for you, of course, that's all fully editable. So you can do that. You can give it a title, which usually you would do the city name as the title in this case, and then save it. And then once I've saved it, it's kind of hard to see because I have the select button on there, but if I turn off select, you see a big ugly yellow box in the middle there. That's telling me that there's a note about that particular, at that location. And since it's right in the center of the hex and right on top of a feature, I pretty much know that that's related to that particular feature. And so I can pull that back up by going here to add edit view note and select. And that's another way to get that same bit of information. But I can also do that to an arbitrary spot where if I wanted to go off into these mountains, if I wanted to say that there's some sort of encounter here, I can give it a title and give it a description and so on, save, and I've got a new one there. Now those boxes tend to look ugly on a map after a while, so you can also toggle them off with this little show, this checkbox next to show here down on the bottom. Back to this notes of back to the selected and notes of selected. Let me pull this back up one more time though, because I want to show you that you can also assign a file, either an image if you've got a map of that particular thing from some other program or some other resource, or you can also do a you can also link to another Worldographer file, so you can pull it up as another tab. If you've created that city map in Worldographer, you can pull it up as another tab by just clicking Open File once you've assigned it with the Change File button. So that's kind of cool. Delete will remove that particular feature from the map, so I can just hit delete. You can also just undo it, Control Z. Changing the Z-axis is something that's kind of more useful for features on other types of mats, on battle mats, or to a degree with the isometric style maps, particularly with something new with the mountains that we might do here, we might save for another video. But that allows you to just control how do they overlap, how do two features overlap. Hide terrain icon. So we'll put down another city and do hide terrain icon and put this on a terrain with an icon, and you can see it disappears. And it's even kind of cool. It moves, as I move it around, it removes that icon that was below. Place freely. If you noticed there a moment ago, it didn't move until I got to roughly the center of the next, or until I got into the next hex, I should say. Place freely, though, allows me to just, put it right there or right there. And as the center point of that icon moves, that's where that icon gets removed. But for this type of, or if I'm not putting it right there in the center, I would typically not hide the icon underneath. Let me select a different one though now, because I'm going to show This fill tile bottom, it just fills in the bottom, and that's, if you're used to those classic icons from the 80s, like I said, that's how they looked, is they had the bottom of the features were kind of filled in just to make them a little more prominent, look a little more interesting. I've also got, before that I kind of skipped this override color. So I can change the color if I wanted it to be dark red, for example, or if I want it to be blue, or whatever I want to do, I can change those colors. On that color chooser, I've also got custom color, where if I don't like any of those swatches, well, on the bottom here, I have these custom colors, which are preset to the background colors of the most common terrain types. But if I want to make my own custom color, I can come over here, and then I'm not restricted to this palette of preset colors. I can change it to whatever I want. Most importantly to me, though, is the opacity. Sometimes it looks good to make things semi-transparent, so sometimes I'll slide that around, and particularly for the grid, which we'll get to in a little bit. Anyway, so that's that. Adding a ring, we can stick a ring around there. You can see that this added a white ring because that was the default color there, but if I wanted to change it to a red ring, I can do that. Those aren't really used too much that I know of for your World Kingdom maps, but you can use these with our our cosmic icon set, which here on the features, there's also terrain, cosmic, which gives you, there's no cities in the cosmic, but it gives you a number of icons that represent, star systems or space stations and such. So you can add a ring, and that got used or became popular with Traveler, which will put a ring around an icon representing a particular star system that tells you that this area is quarantined, or there's something else that's special about that. And speaking of that, speaking of the cosmic maps and Traveler and stuff, that's also where these feature decorations came from on the bottom of this. I can copy and paste a particular icon, for example, or symbol, check that on, give it a position, say right there on the bottom at the 6 o'clock position, and even give it a different color. Say if I wanted to, well, that's already red for the ring, but if I wanted to give it a dark blue or something, I can put that there. And those icons there represented that a particular star system had a naval base or had some sort of repair facilities or things like that. However, they do come in handy if I turn off the ring, where I can specify, hey, if this is this city, what's the strength level? Like, how many units of troops are there, or how many catapults are there, or how many, how high is the technology of that city, or things like that. I can put those in little letters, codes around the map, and maybe not so much the 6 o'clock, because we're going to use 6 o'clock for something else. So I can put it there over at the 3 o'clock position, which is underneath this little dial, which I should point out is a way for me to rotate an icon. It's not as important here for these features, but for your battle maps and for your settlement maps, that's a way for you to give an arbitrary rotation around a particular, or give a feature a rotation. If I want to reset that, the easiest thing to do is go click this, click 0. If you want to set it to any value you want, you can also, set it to 228 through that, or set it through to one of these common percentages. Every 45 degrees are here. Where were we? Override default scale. That also relates to things that you can do on the map as well. So I can override the default scale, which for this icon is 75%. And if I, for some reason, wanted to make it more prominent and say it's 100%, so I can make it bigger. Or if I wanted to, some cases you might have a big table on a battle mat and you want to make it larger, you can just use that. If for some reason you want it to be skewed, where you don't want to have the same aspect ratio, I can go here, and then once I change this, when it's -1, it's just saying ignore the height, use only the width. But so now if I wanted to make this, 150, because I wanted to make it really tall, I can do that. As I was saying though, you can do that on the map also by grabbing these corner handles, and that allows me to resize it as well. However, those those corner widgets will disappear if I don't have, once I turn these off, you're not going to see those. Flip, I can flip it vertically or horizontally. GM only, we saw that same sort of functionality as before, but it's only going to be the icons. If you want to show them that there's a desert here, but you don't want to reveal that there's some special ruins there, then you can set that to GM only. Tags are kind of cool. That's another way that you can hide things, you control things. You can say remove all the political things on the map, because if I do say that this is political, and I go over here and I say hide the objects that are political, it disappears, and vice versa. There's also a show, so I can change it so it's only going to show based on what text is entered in this box instead. Layer. Worldographer, and especially Hexographer before, it was kind of designed to kind of keep things simple, to not expose the idea of layers of what's on top. It was always about just saying, hey, you're going to want to have your water, and then you're going to want to have your land on top of that, and your features on top of that, and so forth. As we started to add more and more complexity, allow people to do more and more types of maps, it became important to expose that and let people change that around. So you can specify what layer do you want your features to be on, and this will affect the currently selected object, and then any objects that you place afterward will be on whichever layer you happen to be picking here. That goes up here. If we look at the layers, this is all the layers that are available for this map. You can add more and you can remove them, although if you have a bunch of objects on a layer, make sure you want to remove that. Don't remove it if you have anything on that layer that you want to keep until you've moved those objects. But you can turn on and off. I mean, particularly the grid can be turned off to here. However, let me jump down. Let me take a moment to show you guys here with the show. This is another way for me to turn off the grid if you don't want that. I can also configure the grid with this button here. We were trying to compress this bottom bar as much as possible if you don't have a large screen. So that's why it's kind of, we don't have a lot of detail here. But hopefully you get the idea that the gear icon is a configure icon, and it's next to grid there. So there you are. And you can set up the grid. The most important part is just this top little bit, the current levels tile grid. If you're doing the multiple levels, map levels, world, continent, kingdom, and so forth, then you can get into these other layers and set those up differently. But for our purposes, we're going to stick with this one. And as I said before, I like to lower the opacity. And I like this effect. I like to make it somewhere between 20 and 30%. Save. Okay. You can see how that makes the grid much less prominent. And it just, to me, it just looks prettier to do it that way. But you don't have to. You can turn it off completely. You can leave it the default. You can make it stronger by making it thicker if you want. Make it a different color. Whatever. I'm more of a programmer, not an artist. So if you've got a particular effect that you're going for, go for it. Back over to the features. Where were we? We were here at layer, and we were talking about the layers. World, continent, kingdom, province, these checkboxes will control whether or not that feature is shown when you do switch the map levels, and we'll do that shortly. But if you don't have these other levels checked, then that particular object won't appear on those other levels. You cannot uncheck it on the current level that you're viewing, however. So if I'm on the world level, I can't uncheck world. Label. So this is good for if I want to give this city a name. I can say city name. And you can see it already was putting it out there on the map. I can give it a distance from that, from how far from the center of the hex do I want it to be, like kind of the default, or do I want to slide it down even more? I can do that. Position, do I want to put it at 6 o'clock or do I want to put it at 12 o'clock or some other position? I can. What style do I want to use? What label style? So I can use the city style that's kind of defaulted in there. I can also I can customize those label styles, and that again, that's probably for a later video for how to customize that. But if I do change this to no preset style, where I want to have it something different, I want this particular city to look unique in a way. I can change the font and all that stuff here, and it's probably beyond the scope of this video as well to go into all those details. But hopefully, having seen all this so far, you can get a feel for what those are and try them out if you're not sure. So that's our features. Let's talk about shapes briefly and labels briefly. Shapes, this is how I can create, roads, create coastlines that are custom, things like that. I have a bunch of controls here and this just is probably something that we can't get into a lot of detail on. Suffice it to say, I've got some presets here where if I wanted to have a road, I can do a line, and I can then say from this city right here, I wanted to, draw some points. Now, to me, that is far too thick. I think that's actually a line for a different type of a map. I would probably go with more like 5 or maybe 8. Yeah, maybe 8 might be good. That's a little bit narrow for me, but yeah, something like that would be good. So I can do that kind of a line where I'm just clicking point to point. You can drag, but then you're going to get a whole ton of points that are probably not necessary. If you want to get a nice curve, that's what this curve is. And this is going to, after you put down 4 points, you're going to start seeing your line up here. You've got a starting point, a control point, another control point, and then a destination point. Then I can do a control point, and another destination point. And then I can go, and the important thing to know is here, control drag to move a point, shift click to delete a point, alt click to add a point to a segment in the middle when it's not an arc/oval. And so I can take this point if I wanted to smooth that out a little bit, and I can shift it like this by just holding down control as I drag. That's our shape editing functionality, and polygons work the same way. Polygons have another interesting bit of functionality. So far we just looked at these presets, which you can ignore. You can set up your color and your size as you want, and the fill as you want. Opacity, it did preset road because I picked road there. These tags work the same way as what we just said on the features. Level change scale is something where if you're doing that map level stuff, how much do you want that line to change? It actually might be better to do 0% because that road isn't going to get bigger as you move in from world, continent, kingdom. That's just a representation of a road. If this is our world level, and if our hexes are 100 miles across or 150 miles across or whatever the math works out to being, 8% of that 150 miles is, going to be something like over 10 miles. So those roads aren't that thick. So you probably don't want it to grow in size because even as you get down to the kingdom and province level, it's not going to be you're not going to want it any bigger on the map. So that's probably a good thing to keep down to 0 and not use the default. In fact, after having this discussion, maybe I'll change the default. We'll see. Or have some other way to override that. Layer placement, we already saw as well. GM only. Snap points to grid. This is kind of cool. So snap points to grid. So if I check that and do a new line, then as I click, what it's doing is it's actually going to snap it to the nearest, well, let me show you all each of them. So the starting point, 1/4 of the way across, 1/2 the way across, 3/4 of the way across, and then at the next hex. It's snapping it, and the same thing up and down. So it will do, so for example, here I'm in the center bottom, then it will do like 1/4 of the way up, and then halfway up, and then 3/4 of the way up, and then all the way up. And it's just, looking at where did I click and picking the closest of those options and kind of just making it perfectly at the top, bottom, or one of those couple of points, quarter way, halfway, 3/4 of the way. Even better though is add tile border to polygon. So if you wanted to make, and again, this is about the style of maps that were popular in the early 80s. If you want to make your country borders line up with hexagons, you keep that checked. Let's make a polygon. Let's, in this case, because our borders are generally like a dark red maroon, we'll pick that color. For the sake of argument, just to see it, we'll do a color, and we'll set that color to be custom, and we'll set it to be a very, very light, just like a 20% or so. Save that, so it's set to use that. And then I can start clicking, and it's going to add these. Now please just use this to create adjacent. Don't click another one far off to the side. It's going to give you a weird looking incorrect polygon. But as long as I keep on adding to the shape, it's going to do that. If I don't want to have a hex part of that border anymore, click on it again and it removes it. So that's kind of a cool feature. As I said, this is the way that these maps were done back in the early 80s, and so that gives you a quick way to do that. You don't have to click 4 or 5 points to make that part of the polygon. You can just click once. Then how do you want your lines to be capped off, and how do you want them to be joined, and how, if you're doing an arc, an oval, and you want to have just half the oval, this is how you would do that, and I'd encourage you to experiment with those. Z-axis, we saw that before, how that works for the features, same sort of thing for shapes of controlling what's on top of what. Drop shadow, inner shadow, box blur are outside the scope of probably this video, but you can, tinker with them, turn them on, change the values, see what effects you get. We talked briefly about arcs and ovals here. You're just going to click a point and then click another point, and it's going to give you that area. Center point, border point, bounding box is how it does it. So polygon, line, curve, select, just allows us, so when you hit select, all the points for all the shapes come up as little dots, and then you can click one to pick which shape it is that you're trying to edit, and then that turns to that color cayenne. And then you can add points by continuing on, just clicking more points if you want to add it to the end, or use these, control drag, shift click, and alt click in order to move points and delete them and so forth. So that was select, deselect. So if I wanted to move on to another one, I can control D or hit deselect, and then I can pick a different shape and do stuff with it. Join shapes, you have two shapes are overlapping, you can put them together. Taper a line, this is good for rivers, where if I wanted to just, let's try it. So it's an effect to kind of widen a line as you get to the Gulf. Turn off this snap. So I've got that, and what I can do then is take that line and taper it, and it's asking us, hey, the mouth of the river is nearer the top, and how much to change it, and so say maybe I wanted to have it only go to maybe 12%. Taper it. So that's how wide it gets, that's how narrow it gets. So if you wanted to do something like that, you pull off that effect. It turns that line into a polygon. So that covers all that. On to our labels. Labels are just a way to add a label arbitrarily to the map, not tied into a particular feature like what we had before with the city name up there. And so I can do, whatever my map label might be, I can stick it on the map, place it here, and that's using the settings over here because I didn't pick a label style. So it's just using the settings for if I want it to be bold or if I want it whatever, and I can select it, and then I can change these and it will apply to the selected object, and then if I don't have an object selected, it'll apply to the next object that I place, the next text label I place. Can rotate it, just like what we saw before. We can drag it to resize it. We can control what layer we're putting it on. If I want to give it a particular label style, like so, say if this is an important feature of the map, maybe I want to do that. Maybe I want to do that. Whatever I want to do, I can pick that. GM only, tags, and these checkboxes we talked about on features, and so that should be self-explanatory from that. We have a configure button here, which I'll pull up briefly, and this just lets you control what those label styles are. You can add another new label style over here. You can, change the font and the colors. Close. Real quick, fog of war. I showed this briefly at the beginning of the video, but you can select an area and then hide everything but that selected area, and then reveal parts of the map by selecting new areas and reveal them. And so again, probably not the scope of, we're coming up on 50 minutes here, so probably don't need to past 50 minutes. Probably don't need to go into detail there. Trace and underlay, this allows us to select a file and it puts it under the map and change the opacity, set it to say something like 50%, so you can kind of see through, and you can control that and make it more or less that opacity, and you can resize that under that image so it spans however many tiles that you want, and the width and the height, how many tiles do you want it to be, including fractions. So that's how you can pull that off. All right, other stuff that I need to get into. So yeah, I do need to get into this level stuff. I've alluded to it a few different times. So let me do this once. So I'm going to go comment. I'm going to accept the default value of 6. And there's a lot of detailed instruction here telling you about things in memory, because this can generate a whole bunch of additional objects to your computer. But I can go 6 to 1 and hit OK. And now you can see where I've got that hex within a hex kind of stuff going on. And here you can see it added some randomness, as we saw before as well. So that's what that does. And you can go again for a kingdom and a province level and make those edits and so forth. This is just zoom out, and zoom in. Memory usage, yeah. If you get to a map that has multiple levels and has a large number of hexes, you can use up quite a bit of memory. So this just gives you a feel for how much memory you happen to be using, and if you're maxed out or not. Let me next jump into these things here on the bottom. We talked already about the notes, add view, edit notes, and show them with the checkbox, and you can filter them as well. You can say, this is useful especially for the settlement maps, where if you want to just see, hey, where are the taverns in town, you can filter it for tavern. And it will show you only the notes that are related to taverns, for example. GM only we talked about. Glow, this is a little checkbox that you can add where if an object is GM only, it will glow. That feature will glow so that you know what can the player see and what can't they see. That just lets you, and then you can go back and turn things back on to GM only or off if you need to. Feature labels, what we saw, let me go back up to the world level here, and coming back here. So our feature labels, this city name over here, if you want to turn them all off, you can use this checkbox and that will turn them off. Sometimes they can clutter up a map. Again, particularly with settlement maps where you might label each of the buildings, maybe you want to turn them off at times. Hide and show objects with tags, we mentioned that already. The grid, we mentioned that. Configuring the grid, this is where you go for that, as I showed you before. Numbers, yes, we didn't turn on the numbers. So if you wanted to turn on the hex numbering, you've got that. We give you a bunch of controls for that, for what the font should look like and how much padding should be done for each of the numbers and so forth. Shadows, a map that uses a lot of drop shadows can be slow. So what you might want to do is you might want to check this off as you're editing the map and moving it around a bunch and everything. And then when you're ready to export it or print it or whatever, you probably want to check that back on to get the effect that you want, as well as turning it on periodically as you're editing them to make sure that you've got the shadows that you want. Up here using toolboxes, if you check this, then these drawers on the side as well as the mini map all become little floating dialogues, and you can move them around and see more of the map. And some people prefer that kind of a UI or not. If you want to keep it the default, you can. Coming back up to here, yeah, I think going into more detail on this is beyond the scope of a 101 video. And likewise, most of this is going to be, hopefully a lot of it's self-explanatory, but I'll get into a 201 video and we'll get into the details on these. We showed some of this stuff already. Configure, this is a way for you to add your own custom features and icons and so forth, and also we sell a number of map packs, and this is a way to get those. And we've done some other detailed videos on just that functionality that I'd encourage you to look at for now, but again, I'll probably do another video on that. Generate, yes, this is a fun one, and I should touch on this. Regenerating a map level will regenerate that continent level, for example, or we can specify. It'll prompt us, hey, what level do you want to generate or regenerate, and it will do that for us, and we can delete one as well. Generating coasts. We saw that real briefly when I just did the generate coast button on the terrain drawer at the beginning, but I can do the whole map at once, and I can delete the ones that are already there first. So I hit delete first to get rid of the ones that are already there. Then I can generate coasts, and I can say, I don't want to use isometric because we're not doing an isometric map, but I do want to convert that to C, the coastal axis to C, and it does it for me. There, boom. So it does a lot of calculations to come up with all these random coasts, and so it strips some land all over the place. However, if I go back to this map, if I want to see the isometric, this is new in 1.42. Where we have generate coast with isometric. So this is actually going to put new feature icons on top of the map. So it does use prettier. I better spell prettier correctly. Hit OK. So yeah, if you're using version 1.43, I will learn how to spell prettier. So it adds these coasts, and it adds rocky coasts for mountains and badlands and a couple of other terrain types, and it adds regular coastlines for other terrain. If you'll notice, though, you do get mountains that kind of get cut off because it's basically put a stamp of this coast on top of this terrain icon, and that mountain is built into the terrain icon. So to get around that, up here on Tools, we do have a Make Isometric Mountains features, which will take that terrain icon, that terrain icon, it'll take that, make it a base terrain, which is basically just the gray texture on the bottom, and then add a feature of a mountain, or two or three, if there's several clustered together. Like if it's a couple of mountains, a couple of hexes are mountains, it'll give us several so that it gives us, so that not every mountain is tied to the center of one hex. Here we go. You failed me. Nope, I just didn't click on yes. So there we go. So it did that. And then you can see that things still get pushed off to the shore a little bit. I can, then select this mountain and slide it back a little bit and give a slightly different effect, but it's it looks a whole lot better that way. Or I could even delete it if I wanted to. If I don't think that this terrain has the space for that mountain, I can drop it completely or tweak them around. And that's what we get. So, you might have to do that with several icons that are around. This one looks good, but over here we've got a couple that are off. But that's the idea behind that. So I was on Generate. Generate Rivers will also put down some sample rivers for us. Generate Nations Empires. Ooh, yes, that's cool. So you saw me put this border around here to kind of make my own by hand, and I've been placing a few of these. But Generate Nations Empires will do that for the whole map for me all at once, and it does. If I want 10 nations and empires, that's how many I picked as default when I started. gives me some other options for what I want those border areas to look like. Hit OK. Boom. And so it created this border for this country right here and put in these other nations and other cities and so forth and other points of interest all automatically based on that resource information that we saw in the terrains. It's looking at where are good places to put these different city icons and capitals and towns and villages. I can do the same thing for rivers. I can add 10 at a time or 20 at a time or however many I want. It does look at the terrain, elevation information, and try to go downhill. Not exactly. If there's only a slight difference between two different hexes, it could go uphill technically, but that could just be a lower, it's going to be traveling in a lower section of that terrain. The overall level of a particular terrain might be 3,000, but hey, part of it might be 2,500, for example. So anyway, it tries to run mostly downhill. Generate resources. Yeah, we don't need to do, well, that'll add some more. Yeah. So this will regenerate all the values. So all that resource information, if for some reason, it's mostly for maps that are older that don't have that information and want to generate them. Data, yes. So this is probably the last thing for me to go into is the data with the world name stuff. So I can change the data file that generates all this stuff. But for our purposes, since that's a later video type of concept, this is all the information it generates about the world. You can have some intro text here and everything, but it actually generates a number of cultures for your world, and a number of religions based on those, and gods for individual pantheons. And each, I can click on all these and it gives me some stub information for all of them. Nations. Just something to start from. And it basically establishes a culture, and it picks a language for that culture, and then it picks religion or generates religions for each culture as needed, and nations from that. And so some nations will overlap and have a couple of will reuse a culture. So you might have two nations that are both this particular Luna culture, for example. And all this is stub information that you are free to ignore or totally rewrite if you like, or it's just kind of cool to have something to start from. So, long way to go here, but I think that's our Worldographer 101 video. I thank you for your attention, and I'm actually pretty proud to have gotten through all that in one run because I'm not much of a video editor, and I just do it from scratch, a stream of consciousness, start to finish. So again, I hope that's helpful, and we'll be doing other videos, as I said, and we'll get into details of other specific features. We've been doing that for a while. I encourage you to look at the YouTube channel that we've got and look at other videos, do a search for different topics that might be troubling you. Also, go to our Discord on worldographer.com. There's a link to our Discord. We also have a forum on inkwellideas.com, and support at inkwellideas.com is the other way to get questions answered. So thanks a lot. Have a great day.